Hi everyone, I'm very glad to welcome back Mubarak Bala. Thank you so much for being here again, Mubarak. And just a quick reminder before we start, Mubarak Bala is a Nigerian activist and humanist and the president of the Humanist Association of Nigeria. Because of the persecution he faced for simply being a vocal atheist, he was imprisoned in his own country and now lives abroad in a confidential location. If you want to learn more about his incredible story, you can find it on my channel. Dear Mubarak, first of all, thank you for agreeing to join us again. I asked you to come back because I wanted your help to understand the current situation of persecutions against Christian groups in Nigeria. Your voice, both secular and internal to the country, offers something rare, a way to look at what is happening without religious or ideological filters, and hopefully without the distortions that dominate public discussions almost everywhere. I believe that an internal perspective like yours can help us see the human reality behind these events for what they truly are. So, with that being said, can we begin?
Sure, we can.
Okay. So, could you offer a brief historical overview of religious violence and conflict in Nigeria to help us understand how the current situation developed?
Well, thank you, Nero. Thank you for having me. And my gratitude to your audience for giving me a second chance to come back. The background Nigeria story cannot be oversimplified. You cannot just take Nigeria in context and say you want to explain what's happening. You have to go down centuries. Over the period and also I think pre-colonial times, especially if you have to consider the whole region, maybe the sub-Saharan region or maybe the Sahel region to be specific. That's where you get the bigger picture of what's happening in Nigeria. Indigenous Africans on the sub-Saharan continent, meaning the darker skinned Africans, have not been penetrated enough with the Northern African, or what you call the Maghreb conversions into Islam. And so they remained largely traditional in their own enclaves, in their tribes. What we had were tribes, diverse languages and ethnicities, and cultures, especially in Nigeria. In modern Nigeria, you have almost 1,000 ethnicities and different languages and tribes. We have over the centuries converted to Islam. That's the Sahel region. Sahel region having contact with North Africa. Uh, the trans-Saharan trade, if you could read about it, is about exchanges of spices between the Mediterranean and sub-Saharan Sahel region, especially on those axes of the Sahel. So most of the cultures that are in contact with the Arabs in the Maghreb, that's North Africa, and the Mediterranean cultures converted to Islam in small pockets over the centuries. I think between the 10th and 11th century, that's when we had contact with Islam. And without jihad, without violence, a lot of people on the Sahel region converted to Islam. So this mixture of the cultures created this kind of new alliance with North Africa, meaning most of the tribes that have taken Islam oriented their perspectives and their worldview towards the Muslim world, which is the Maghreb or the Ottoman Empire, which it was at the time. And so they now clashed with the typical traditional African religions, which are mostly non-Christian, because if you could observe, Christianity only came a century ago with the colonial introduction of Christianity and the missionaries. Highest maximum, you could say, 2 centuries from the Atlantic Ocean inwards into the Niger River. So for a century and a half, that people are Christian, they are victimized by the people in the north, because you could observe that the cultural Islamic doctrine doesn't tolerate coexistence and cohabitation with other faiths. This is the main Islamic doctrine. But also, you could also know that before the conversion to Christianity by the south of Nigeria and the Atlantic coast, with contact with the Europeans, Portuguese, British, German, and the Belgians, you have had this Northern African contact. So Muslims that have converted have already applied the Sharia law in their own enclaves, especially the Senegambia region, which is far west of the West African subcontinent, and then on the Sahel at the central level, then going eastwards to Sudan, Central African Republic, Chad, and up on the way up to Somalia. The only countries that were spared were the Christian Ethiopians and that mountainous plateau. That's the only place that was spared. But then everywhere was Islamic. And so there were clashes, if you notice, between the Muslim North from North Africa and cultures that converted to this new Islamic doctrine along these tectonic plates line with the traditional African traditional religions, because they are worshiping idols, they are worshiping deities, trees, whatever they could call sacred, maybe rainfall. And so the Muslims will always be hostile to these cultures and tribes, because Islam calls them maybe the scum of the earth. Almost literally, they are dehumanized so much in the Islamic doctrine, so they don't stand a chance. But then they found succor with the contact with the British, and they started converting to Christianity, at least for protection and civilization, where they had no clothing. They were just wearing leaves and other skin just to cover the genital area. We would see them bare-chested when before the contact with the British. And so to our people, to the North Africans and to the Sahel region, these are typically what you would call subhuman, just bush people. So they were raided for their cattle, they were raided for their farm produce, they were raided for the slaves they could become, they were raided just because they are infidels, they were raided because they don't have a cohesive cultural standpoint. Because they are small tribes in isolations. They are not really a united front. So they are raided in isolation, especially for the slave trade. Most of the slave trade that you've seen in those Roman times, I think it's also we could say it came from sub-Saharan Africa by slave trade. This is even pre-Islamic times, pre-Christian times, pre-Abrahamic religion times. People that are culturally more maybe exposed or superior would take advantage of those tribes that are not, and they treat them like cattle and sell them off in their slave markets. That's how we ended up in the Colosseum. You see dark African skins in the Colosseum fighting the gladiator fights. So they came from the Sudan, Southwest Africa, and then other regions, but it's mostly through this trans-Saharan trade. And so it perpetuated over the centuries, and we converted to Islam, and Islam weaponized this slave trade, and we became mostly the feeder nations of the Africans, the Arabic slave trade in the East. So we are slaves in the North African continent, we are slaves in the Islamic world as far back as far north as Turkey. And then the colonialists came in around 1850, and they started converting people through the missionaries. And then now these traditional subhuman cultures found succor through Jesus, and then the church came present. But then also going north, far north, while the colonialists are trying to establish the administrative presence in the far northern states where Islam is predominant, they realized that they could even conquer the administrative and the social aspects of the land, but they cannot really tame the Islamism, the culture that is Islamic. And so they tried to circumnavigate around all these exceptions. And so the British enacted a law, not just the British, I think even the French and the Germans that were on the sub-Saharan continent tried to enact a law that if you are from the historically Muslim regions of the Sahel, you are not allowed to convert into the new religion with the missionary services being provided. So it's only those traditional Africans that were allowed to convert because they are not affiliated to the culture. So the Islamic North resisted, and Christianity has not penetrated the Sahel region entirely. Entirely. That's why you hardly find Christians living there as indigenous people. The ones that are Christian have already resisted. The only surviving tribes are those on the plateau. That's why you hear mostly the plateau and the river beyond the river Benue or the river Niger. These are people that have survived the traditional raids that the Sahel warriors, the caliphate that was there, which is called the Osman Danfodio Caliphate. They have survived it for centuries because they retreated into the hills and into the forests and beyond the river Niger, giving them a natural topographical barrier and protection. So they wouldn't come down on those hills, and that's how they survived over the centuries. They were in a defensive position, and they were never converted. So when they came on their own volition to join with the missionaries, they became the minority tribes mingling in the north, and now they have protection. But then the constitution that came along with colonialism made it that we are all equal. Initially, the Islamic tribes and cultures considered that we have hierarchies. So those Muslims are the first class, and then the Ahlul Kitab, meaning the people that have other religions that are recognized, like Abrahamic religions, second class. Then the third class are the animists and the ones that are worshipping idols. They are not considered with any good class, especially idol worshippers, which are just seen as what you are supposed to just convert or kill or make into your own slaves. So now the Constitution, the British Constitution came and gave recognition to everyone as equals under the British Crown. Now these people meant they could now mingle equally and engage equally and travel around freely around these conquered territories under the colonial rule. And now they re-established a presence where they had no presence. So they established presence with contacts. But then the British left after only 6 decades of presence in the northern Nigerian region. They left. What happened is that now the politicians tried to bring back, because the British tried to hand over to the superior culture, which is the most stable tribe that they could believe would handle Nigeria better, which is my tribe, which is the northern Nigerian Muslims. Because if they had handed over to the more educated southern regions, what it means is that the north would succeed, would leave the enclave, would leave Nigeria. They would prefer they go back to their cultural Islamic heritage. But then the British handed over the civil, or what you would call the secular system, to them to handle, but given us a constitution that is mostly secular. But immediately they left, what we ended up is another clash. We ended up with a civil war, and then the civil war fought between the north and the south, with those that don't want to belong with the Muslim dominated country called Nigeria. They tried to succeed, but then they have the oil resources, and my people in the north have need these resources. And so we tried to take back their territory, and we did by force at the cost of about 3 million people. And so Nigeria came back by the 1970s, only a decade after the British left, and we reenacted the constitution and started another presidential system, only for the military to come back and take over. So for the time the British left to the modern times, the year 2000, by the turn of the century, for the 4 decades that the British left between 1960 and the year 2000, all you had is a military rule. And so the actual traditional culture could not rev itself out to re-establish itself with that freedom, because the military are more or less more secular, just like the British. So they didn't allow that Sharia sentiment, the Islamic sentiment, to have its own roots. But the moment they decided to hand over to the politicians, to the civilians, then it became the status quo that it was when the British left. The British left and handed over to us, the northern Nigerians, to manage this country. But we wanted to, manage it according to our understanding of how Islam could take advantage, and which led to the clashes and the perception that other peoples are marginalized, and it ended up in the Civil War. Before the Civil War, there were assassinations of the top northern leaders, because they thought if they could kill the northern leaders, maybe they could stop the encroaching Sharia and Jihad. and they failed, and it ended with the Civil War, 1966 to 1969. But immediately after that, the military took over and managed the situation for 30, 40 years until 1999 when they left. The military handed it back to the civilian government, and immediately we now grabbed back the narrative. We wanted back the system. But unfortunately for Nigeria, or what we would call, for me, I would say in a secular way, fortunately, the military handed over to the South, a Christian in the South. So how do we now manage the situation that we want the dominance, we want the power, but for the first time, the country is handed over to a Southerner. So the sentiment grew that we don't have to remain in Nigeria. We can bring back the Sharia, we can bring back the constitution, the Sharia constitution. We can throw away the Nigerian system and start our own Sharia agitations, which started with all these killings in the year 2000, because governors in the northern Sahel region, the northern Nigerian region, decided to bring back the caliphate that was there between 1804 to 1903, or just when the British came. So they started bringing back the system. What you end up with is fanaticization of the populace, hostility towards the constitution and towards the federal government, even though the federal government is paying the states every month, monthly allocations from the resources of the South, the Christian South. We are still trying to enforce our own ideology on the whole country. And the predicament with my people, especially the Muslim North, is that we don't just want the Sharia in our region. You see, if you take the northern Nigerian region, for example, and say, okay, you want Sharia, take it. But it's not how the mindset is. This is not how Islam wires people's brain. Islam tells you that Islam is not just for you, it's for the world, it's to dominate, it's not to coexist. And so my people wouldn't bother just having the Sharia. We have had the Sharia for 25 years and we still want more. So what we want is Sharia all over Nigeria. Whether you're a Muslim, whether you're a Christian, whether you are in the former Islamic empire or you're not, we don't care. What we want is domination, the hegemony of Sharia rule over all that is under the territory called Nigeria, because this is the mentality we had, that the British handed over Nigeria to us. So no one matters, no one should matter, no constitution should matter. And that's why you ended up with the killings. So if you don't have this understanding, because my people would try as much as they can to, shift away the blame that it's not about religion. It's mostly tribe, social, culture, economics. It has to be climate change. It has to be that. It is not. Whether we are poor, whether we are broke, whether we have money, whether we have agriculture, which was very sustainable at the time, we still wanted to raid smaller tribes and take slaves out of them. We were rich. We were very versatile, with a very thriving culture, but still we wanted to take advantage of others. So it doesn't matter whether these people are maybe victims or they're maybe seen to be just nuisance. It doesn't matter whatever the West sees or whatever anybody sees. The mentality is that you try as much as you can to blur these lines, that it's not about religion, it's not about whatever, it's just clashes because climate change has taken over someone's farmland, or maybe these are nomads with their cattle that want to roam about and feed their cattle. It's what I could call an inherent belief that we cannot coexist with anybody. We just have to dominate. People have to be subject to us. And especially that in Islam, what they call وَكَلِمَةُ اللَّهِ الْعُلْيَا. What it means is that the word of God has to be on top of everything else. There is also another verse in the Quran that says لِيُظْهِرَهُ عَلَى الدِّينِ كُلِّهِ وَلَوْ كَرِهَ الْكَافِرُونَ, that Islam is not supposed to coexist with other small, unimportant religions, no matter how big they are, but it's supposed to be above it, and it's supposed to be considered the superior law. So no British system would come, no colonial system would come to tell you that you cannot practice the Sharia law, you cannot have Sharia, you cannot subjugate people, you cannot wage jihad, you cannot call people slaves. We have special names for these tribes. up until this moment that Nigeria exists, Nigeria cannot tame the preaching that people are supposed to be killed. It's preached randomly in northern Nigeria in mosques, just that it's in local languages, so the federal government cannot really understand. But we know, because we know the language. The preaching is there, kill the infidel, it's always there. And we have special names for them. They are Arna, meaning infidels. They are heathen, meaning dirty people. They are Najas. Najas, that's where you get the name natives from, meaning they are impure or dirty. These are what we call these people, and they are supposed to coexist with us. So they could even live in peace with us, but they already know their status. They are already afraid of us. We've already known this, even as to this moment that they are living with us, coexisting in northern Nigeria. They will try to offer you Christmas food. They will greet you on the way. If they are coming and you are coming, they will try to give you right of way, because they have that mentality that they cannot do anything to rile up any hateful behavior, because one small spark could mean the end of your life or the end of your community. They're already a small minority in a behemoth system, a behemoth culture of more than 100 million people. So you don't stand a chance. So I've already observed it growing up. You will be passing by maybe a traditional indigenous Christian, even in Plateau State, which is that's the Plateau. That's where they normally have the majority, and that's where they could claim that this is their own land for centuries. They have never moved from there. You would even notice they have the darker shade of skin in those places. But even in those places, if they see you, they'll greet you. They will respectfully greet you. I observed this ever since I was growing up. You cannot pass by a Christian, especially a northern Nigerian Christian, on the streets, and they don't greet you. A Hausa, a Muslim man would just bash by you and maybe rub shoulders and move. But we know this. I've already known this, even by my own experiences. The Christian passing by will greet you respectfully, and most at times will give you that gesture that the road belongs to you, and they'll give you that respect, and you pass them, they will come back into the streets and pass. It has been like that, and it doesn't matter how so much they respect us. We'll still go to the mosques and we'll preach about all these heathens, that they are not clad, they are not covering their body enough, their breasts are out, maybe they are wearing shorts and skirts. So the hate is there, it's perpetuated, and the federal government cannot really tame it. The British have not tamed it when they came and they saw the situation. They don't want to interfere. They made rules, they made laws. That's how you ended up with the blasphemy laws. You have blasphemy laws, you have apostasy laws, not even under the Sharia, but under the civil constitution, that you are not supposed to interfere in the Islamic affairs, and you're not supposed to convert out of the religion. That's how you preserve this region, a culture of
Maintain social order in some way.
So the British experience in Sudan, they have experience in Egypt, they have the experience in India, Pakistan. So they had to maintain that same situation in northern Nigeria. So the British couldn't do it, and they left the system. Now the military only tamed it at a point of a gun, but then now they left. Now you have the politicians, which is mostly our people. So even as they don't have the top political power between 1999 and 2007, they created a lot of trouble, a lot of killings, a lot of deaths over those 8 years, because we felt we have to be at the top of the office. We have to be at the top of the presidency. We don't want to be under any infidel, that's how we said it. So the killing started anew and took a new dimension about Sharia agitation, about domination, about maybe just people not assimilated enough, because these are Christians and they thought they were equal in Nigeria, while we felt they cannot be equal. Islam says they are third-class citizens, or at least since they converted to Islam, they are now second-class citizens, but still they are supposed to be beneath us. This is the sentiment. This is, if you go to the culture and there is no hypocrisy, you remove the veil, this is what you find. But now, if there is the international community, what we try to do is we try to say, no, everybody is being killed. This is Boko Haram. This is terrorists from Niger Republic coming. But before Boko Haram, I told you it's about Sharia. So Boko Haram was there only around, actively starting the jihad only around 2009 and 2011. But A decade prior, Muslims are still rioting and killing Christians. Sometimes it's about a beauty pageant. A small thing such as beauty pageant happening in northern Nigeria, the imams will go to the mosques and they will rile up sentiments that there is a parade of nudity coming from the infidel lands while we are fasting our Ramadan period. This cannot happen. Allah will be very unpleased. Allah will not be happy with us. And this is the reason why we have calamities such as cholera and things like that. And so people will rile up and come out and find people to kill. The pageant is happening in Lagos. That's a coastal city in the south, in Christian lands. Also, the pageant could happen in Abuja, also a neutral, supposedly central neutral city. But the killings will happen in Kano, Sokoto, Kaduna. These are the northern states that are practicing the Sharia. And it will always be a Christian being killed, a Christian business being burnt, or just Christians being scared off. So they have to pack up and leave the state. So the riots started, Sharia riots. Christians are being killed because we needed the space. We have to intimidate and we have to take slaves. And people took slaves, several people. That it's just a small riot, but someone will come and take one young Christian girl and then go and lock her up in their home. And then she will become the sex slave. It has happened several times in Kano, especially in Kano. I have evidence. I've known this. We've known that there are people that were locking up Christians for sex because now there is a jihad and we have captured what our right hand possesses, which is what the Quran says. You know, the Quran says you cannot masturbate, you cannot take, fornicate, you cannot masturbate, but you can have sex with your legal wife or what your right hand possesses. These, what your right hand possesses, are what you can capture by your might, by your strength, by your force, meaning whatever you could capture, maybe a slave, maybe through jihad, through, or what you purchase. You could go and purchase a slave if there is a slave market.
Yes, I wanted to ask you about this because in the technically slavery has become illegal everywhere in the world, but I think that in some folds of states like Nigeria, it can be still in place, and you are just confirming this. So, can you just tell me a little bit more about, for example, slavery or slaves or slave market? Are they still in place right now, nowadays in Nigeria?
The typical slave raids ended when the British banned it in around 1933. That's about 3 decades after taking over. When they took over the region in 1903, they ended the caliphate, the Islamic caliphate called the Fulani Islamic Fodio Caliphate. The British ended it and they declared that there will no longer be slavery, there will no longer be slave raids, there will no longer be amputations and stoning to death, and all these capital punishments of the Sharia are now illegal. You have to go to the British to get approvals to have your Sharia law. So it's not like you could practice Sharia law, but not for the capital punishments, which included the slavery. But then the slavery perpetuated because now they don't have to raid the slaves, but you could still sell and exchange goods in human goods and perpetuate that under the hush-hush terms that we understand they are slaves, even though they are living among us. And most of these slaves could be Muslim as well, because if they were captured maybe a few centuries ago, now they have assimilated, their children have assimilated, and they are Muslim, but still they are slaves. So now the slavery perpetuated even through the 3 decades as the British were there, until they have realized that, and then they also now enacted a specific law outlawing the exchange of human beings as goods and services, meaning the suffrage, the slaves cannot be owned. So they declared that, and evidently it's still on paper. Because as I was growing up, we already knew that in the enclaves of the royal families in the north, there are still people that are considered slaves. The law has not penetrated into these cultural traditional homes. And also now it's evolved into a new system where you keep people that you get from the villages. You just keep them just to feed them. They are working in the home. They are mostly called house girl or house boy. Typically, they're just coming because someone wants them to live in the city, but they don't go to school. They are just there, especially the girl child. They are just there to wash your plates, to clean your children, to clean the house. And that's how they will do that for years until they are ready to be set off for marriage. Then they will be packed back home to their families with some gift. And then there are those that just perpetually just live under you just for feeding. It's not about any salary. There is no mention of salary. Just the fact that you have a house and you are feeding them is enough that they are living. This is when I become president, hopefully in 5 years or 6, this is what I hope to achieve. We have to come back to this because it's slavery, only that it's not defined. Then you also have the male children also coming out from these villages, also just to be evidently holding a bowl that they are al-Majiris, meaning al-Muhajir in Arabic, meaning a migrant. But these are just kids that will come and then beg for food and beg for alms and then do small labor. In exchange, they get small food. And this is also, I think, another kind of slavery. But then also, you still have, as I told you, the mentality that there is a riot. Maybe we lost the presidential election. Most of the times, we present a presidential election, a Muslim president. And then when he lost the election, in 2003, in 2007, in 2011, in 2015. All these perpetual times, it's only the last time, the 2015, that he won. So for all those 3 occasions that we presented the same candidate with all the riling up of the sentiments that he's a Muslim, he's supposed to be the one that will lead us back to the caliphate, all failed. And every time he failed the election, violence would ensue, and it will always be Muslims looking for Christians to kill or their businesses to burn. It has happened all those years. And as I told you, the beauty pageants or small riots, for example, if we hear that there is blasphemy happening in Paris or a blasphemy in London or someone drew the caricatures of the prophet, will still come out and find people to kill, and it's always the Christians. So there is also the slavery there. People will be rendered homeless and they'll become IDPs, meaning refugees internally, and then they'll be taken advantage of. The United Nations and all world bodies will come with all the aid and all the food and all the soap and oil. But still, it comes through the system because the government is there, and then you have the middlemen, and then the warehouses are there, housing all these medicines, all these foods. But then these are the IDPs that are supposed to benefit from that. But then they will still have to be maybe subservient before they could get that. Maybe serve the military or serve someone either with sex, with some kind of placations, and then they get the resources. So it's always been like that. It's very normalized. So the slavery is there, just that you have to understand international law and practices and also be able to penetrate deeper into the culture before you could understand what's happening.
So, public debate, maybe more abroad than in Nigeria, often swings between 2 narratives. One that completely absolves religion, claiming that is never the real factor. And you told us before that everything is more culture, or maybe it's only Boko Haram or Western invention, even. And the other side that weaponizes religion to polarize opinion and fuel distrust and justify discrimination, as seen in populist and nationalist movement so much in Europe, for example. And how can we, from a secular standpoint, see clearly what is really happening? What criteria would you suggest to distinguish honest analysis from ideological manipulation? I think that we don't need those manipulations. What do you think about this?
Well, you see, for me, in my own experience, I have already known the problem. I know the root causes of the problem, but how do we solve it? That's the issue. Uh, for example, let me give you an example. When a terrorist sits down to plan their terror attacks, they will always consider a lot of factors into play. They'll consider, how do we play the sentiment? How do we claim that we are the innocent? How do we claim we are the victims? They will make sure, because they know public opinion matters, even in terror activities. How do we convince people that what we are trying to do is legitimate cause? For example, if the religion of Islam says people are corrupt, it doesn't mean they are stealing money. It means they are worshiping something other than Allah, meaning they are corrupt. If it says people are transgressors on the earth, it's not because maybe they are killing cats and killing dogs. No, they are transgressing because maybe they are drinking alcohol. This is just water, but I could make an example. Or maybe maybe they want secular laws. These are transgressors. When Islamic doctrine is applied to the real world, you'd think that what they would claim to be corruption, to be crime, to be sin, to be evil are just normal life that people are living. And so the terrorists will factor these things out, but then they will not give you the real, actual, maybe the real sentiment that is driving them. What they want is maybe Sharia fanaticization and sympathy. So if they attack and they take the casualties and do whatever they can to rile up their attention up towards their own goals, in the end, they would hope that they will count on people's sentiment, especially if they are seen as the victim. So, for example, typically, if you could take the international context, whenever there are terror attacks and then the culprit is identified as a jihadi terrorist from Islamic culture, then most definitely people that are not well informed about Islam cannot differentiate between the terrorists and their core religionists. So you end up with sentiments against minorities, most especially Muslim sentiments against the colored people, brown people, or black people. And so there is this thin line where you have to identify where are the victims. The victims are generally everyone, but then also what is the ideology driving these atrocities? We could understand that the Islamic ideology is very intolerant. It wants to kill people as much as it can, maximize. But then also they don't want to lose public sympathy. So they would try to claim that they are minorities, they are victims. So the small enclave, the small cell that will carry out the terror attack will now go back and hide behind the larger, for example, the larger Muslim community to say that you are the victims. Now the media will focus on the Islamic community, and then the sympathy will go out, and then Muslims are marginalized. Maybe there are attacks on Muslims or mosques or this or that. But then now it's the Muslim that will bear the brunt of the consequences. But then the terrorists have already withdrawn. They have already caused these atrocities and they have withdrawn because now they want the situation to be taken over by these debates, by these things. But we have to identify. For me, I have already redefined it. I said, well, we have to identify the root cause, which is, for example, Islam. So we could call it Islamophobia. Maybe Islam, what people try to define factually is maybe is in a rational form, in a secular way, is Islam. Then the ideology, which is the terrible thing that is driving the madness. So then we could call it Islamophobia. But then already people have defined this as hate of Muslims. So now I said, well, let me coin something that will give the obvious meaning. So now I created the word Muslimophobia. So I try to, especially now that I'm engaging in a lot of ways to communities, to international media such as you, I try to communicate that we can understand Islamophobia as maybe the new definition where it's just focusing on the doctrine and what is driving the hate and the killings and the victim calling. But then we could also now try as much as we can to create that idea that Muslim phobia is what should be the right word, which is hate against Muslims just because they're Muslim. So we could now try as much as we can to bring to fore the fault of Islam and how people, especially from the religion, the religious divide, maybe Islamists, what you may call Islamists, would bring forth that hating Muslims is bigotry, is prejudice. You can't hate Muslims. But at the same time, you have to identify that the religion which they are Muslims share the same mosques with the terrorists, with the fanatics. And sometimes the Muslims are still there sitting down when the hate preaching is going on. You can't, for example, I always challenge my people, which is the Muslim community, that where are you when they are hating, when they are preaching the hate, when they are saying the infidel should be killed? You don't come out to protest these things. So this is how you suffer the prejudices from the less informed populace, and then everybody comes and lumps you up into the same body. But especially also for me, because I'm trying as much as I can to educate Muslims. This is like me doing the homework with my community. I don't really
Yes.
bother with the infidel world. So sometimes I'll be preaching in the local language in the mosques, especially here in Germany. I try as much as I can to engage Muslims, and I reach out to them because I'm their brother. At least they could understand me. And I tell them we have to make a difference. We have to be the ones fighting terrorism. It doesn't have to be war on terror by America or what you call the imperialists. We can do that. We can end it. We are the ones with the mosques. We are the ones making the donations. Every prayer, come and donate. Every time you come and support the mosque and the community and whatever. But then what have we done to reform Islam from within? Have we weaned ourselves off the jihad, or maybe off child marriage, or the slavery that is legal in all our doctrine? We have never, confronted these things. We always want to go out and claim victim and cry that we are a small minority and we don't share the same ideology of killings. But then we are the ones allowing it to happen in our mosques, most times online. And we could come out to maybe protest for Gaza or for whatever, but you don't see Muslims coming out to protest when a cleric maybe declares that maybe London should be an Islamic city or Sharia should be the world. Where are we in these kind of maybe narratives? I try to put myself with them. So I'll ask them, are we in support of these things? That's why we are quiet. Or do we really have to make a stand that we are secular? We are trying to live in peace with the world. In this way, if we could do that, especially given that the liberal world has given us so much confidence, so much sympathy, so much embrace, that if you notice, the typical innocent white man, or what you call the liberal left, have already embraced the Muslim. We don't care whether they call you terrorists. We don't care whether they call you dominating factors that are coming to change the demographics. We love you. Come to our homes. Come and share meals with us. So you've already have that, embrace. You have that acceptance with at least, let's say, half the hostile West. Then what do you do in the end? You also replicate and reciprocate these acts by also now distancing yourselves away from these hateful preachings, hateful dogma. Especially if you are taking your children to madrasa, most certainly some of them will end up becoming jihadists. The children that are flying away from the UK, from France, from Sweden and Finland a decade ago, flying away into Turkey and sneaking into Syria to join the ISIS, are children in Europe. Most probably their parents are secular, but then you being secular, then you took your children and you took them to a cleric in a madrasa under a mosque, and you handed them over for indoctrination. And so they grew up hating you. They think you're too secular, you will not make paradise. And then they want to also be part of that, what they feel is their original culture, which is jihad and fight and terror and beheadings. And now they are sneaking away from you under your noses and going into Turkey and then into Syria to marry jihadists and help beheading people and buying slaves and killing Yazidis. These are typical Muslims that were innocent, but then you allowed it to happen. How do you counter that? You don't. You only come out to cry on BBC and on the mainstream media that they are my children, they were indoctrinated and they were taken to Syria. Well, you are also responsible for taking them into these kind of situations in the first place. You could imagine 16-year-old impressionable young minds that are already jihadi in mindset. So I've already understood this. So I try as much as I can to isolate the Islamophobia and the new definition of the doctrine hating thing or maybe trying to pressure it to reform, and then the Muslimophobia, which is the bigotry, the prejudices, the hate, and we cannot mix the two. And sometimes
Yeah.
Muslims can help the situation by also trying to distance themselves with these doctrines of hate because they are so perpetuated, so frozen in time that they are so rigid, they cannot change. You
Mm.
cannot change. Muslims, non-Muslims such as myself, cannot change it. I'm trying because I'm part of the culture, I'm part of the community. I try as much as I can not to be alienated too far from the culture. That's why I'm able. And that's why I'm a nuisance. And that's why I end up in jail or with a fatwa or people hating or trying to kill me. But it's because I'm trying to reform. I'm trying to, ginger that kind
Mm.
of feeling that maybe we have to distance ourselves from Islamism, and which especially leads to carnage and these social upheavals.
You know, being you so eloquent about, being especially an insider viewer about all these dynamics, I want to know your point of view about something that happened actually to me. Because recently I raised the case of an Iranian girl who has been married off at 12 or 11 years old. And in the comments, someone personally accused me of white suprematism with a claim that caring about rights in non Western context imposes Western values and that universal human rights are themselves a Western construct, that it is not valid for everyone. As a Nigerian, as a secular thinker and a humanist, how would you respond to this position? What do you think about this claim?
Well, as I tried to emphasize, most times we can only help ourselves before anyone intervenes to help us. For example, in the Western context, Muslim community could help secularize the communities beyond that. No one has to even come to interfere in what we, because we always want to be exclusionists. We want to develop our own, districts and communities in as much closed system as we can. So before anyone interferes with these things, we are the ones with the first assignment to try as much as we can to evolve out of these cultures. Because once you bring these cultures into new societies, these things are new. That's why you have clashes where people consider children mature
Mm.
enough for sex. Sometimes it's rape. Sometimes it's maybe forced marriage. Sometimes it's honor killings. You could see the hijab as a normal thing that you also, as a liberal, maybe want to protect the Muslims' right to wear the hijab. But
Mhm.
also, you have to consider that what happens if she doesn't wear the hijab.
Exactly.
Sometimes the parents will kill her
Mhm.
as honor. It's called honor killing. Sometimes they would bundle her and take her away from the freedom of the West back to Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nigeria, maybe Somalia, just because she doesn't want to wear the hijab. So they will make a trick in a way that they'll just bundle her back. You could
Mhm.
understand this kind of, the attitude is about freezing the culture as much as they can. But then it's doing us harm, it's doing the community harm, and also it's now bringing these points of clashes between the new world, maybe the Western culture, and the Islamic culture. So I think the responsibility mostly, firstly, is always from our own root, from our own culture, how we can try to evolve beyond
Mhm.
these kind of frozen systems. But then also in my own country, people try as much as they can to do the same thing. Whenever there are searchlights on the culture, then everyone will try to blur the vision, try to muddy the waters, so that no one really understands what's going on. Then everyone wants to rile up sentiments, cry victimhood, cry this, cry that. While in reality, we still want to perpetuate the same thing. Sometimes we're the victims. Mostly, I always conclude that mostly the first victims of the Islamism are Muslims. For example,
I
the
totally
hijab thing.
agree.
Exactly. The Muslim girl that would suffer the hijab freedom is always from the Muslim parents. So they suffer because, firstly, she'll suffer, maybe a forced marriage or not killing or something like that. But then also they'll suffer because now maybe they'll end up in jail if they're discovered or they have lost a child, which is a terrible thing. And then
Mm.
also you would see that it's a perpetuation of suffering just from the Muslim community in the first place. But then now it's spilling over because it's clashing with other neighbors with modernity. Technically, it's just globalization. The moment the world is mixing up and globalizing, then you definitely have these points of clashes. And now you end up with these troubles. Especially now, I think that, for example, in northern Nigerian context, you have the Americans paying attention. They don't have the real picture. They don't have the full picture. Sure, certainly there are Muslims being killed by terrorists, but now you ask, why are they killing Muslims? Firstly, sometimes it's because you have chased away the Christians, so they don't have any victim close by. And they are in their forests. Whom do they find? Any neighboring community would do. They need food, they need wives, they need women to enslave. So they will just raid the nearest community, which is now the Muslim community. But this is because you've chased away the actual victims that the jihad was supposed to be meted up with. But then also, again, why do they kill Muslims another time? Maybe if they are not driven by the kidnap ransom monies and maybe the whatever monetary aspect. Now, if they're driven by the jihadi doctrine, which is what is happening, especially Boko Haram and ISIS, you are now dealing with the people that most especially consider you infidel because you didn't join the jihad, or maybe you're part of the, because you're supposed to choose whether the constitution is superior or the Quran is superior. You, by deciding to maybe vote in elections or remain in Nigeria or hold a bank account, meaning you are in the system of the infidels, meaning legitimately you're supposed to be killed. The Quran specifically says the one that doesn't operate under the Sharia law is a kafir. The one that doesn't operate under the Sharia law is a fasik, meaning a corrupt person. The one that doesn't operate under the Sharia law is a transgressor. So, وَمَنْ لَمْ يَحْكُمْ بِمَا أَنزَلَ اللَّهُ فَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْكَافِرُونَ. In another thing, فَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْفَاسِقُونَ. In another, فَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الظَّالِمُونَ. So the Quran defined clearly, nobody would dispute this, that whomever operates not under the Sharia law is one of these three or all of these three. That's the criteria that terrorists will always apply to kill Muslims. Because if you are under the constitution, for example, the Nigerian constitution, then you have already, by definition of the Quran, you have already chosen a side. You are not with the empire, not with the caliphate. So they kill Christians, but then they kill Muslims on the same thing, under the same definition, that you are part of the kafir world. And they can always give this general interpretation. So if people, Muslims especially, if they really want to preserve their own religion, they have to consider these things. How do you manage these definitions of who is a kafir, who is not? Because the Quran is clearly telling you not to be in a secular system. You may resist it, you may do the, we are trying as much as they can, the mainstream Muslims, they are trying to conquer the system from within by removing the secularism, by occupying positions of power, by political machinations, just so that we could be the ones dominating. And then most times they hope that in the end it will still be an Islamic state in the end, but they are doing it in the political way. But the terrorist is impatient. He wants to do it in the instant. He doesn't care whether it's a strategy for 2-3 decades. They want to do it now. And so the Muslims are the ones responsible for redefining what Islam says, or if they could, if they have the courage, to remove altogether these verses because they don't make sense. Why would I be killed just because I choose a system? Only choosing a system. Apostasy also, just leaving Islam, they're supposed to be killed. Just maybe choosing, in fact, by other definitions of terrorists, if you chose to live in the West, then you are a legitimate target. That's why they could indiscriminately bomb a stadium or just open a shooting spree somewhere because they consider you infidels. They are coming into the house of the infidels. So I think the most responsible community for taming these things, and especially avoiding the clashes with the new culture, such as the Western culture or secular democracy, has to be with the Muslim community. That's why I'm always trying to engage. I'm the one hated the most, but I still try to, as much as I can, preach to them. I've not really returned to my actual preaching, which is in Hausa, so I could help northern Nigeria the more, because also my status here is not guaranteed. And if I would do that, it's the most confrontational thing you do with Muslims. You speak in their language, you tell them how to change their lives. You do it in English, they're only engaging 10% of the educated northern Nigerians. If I switch to Hausa and I speak as I am doing this, maybe on a video with the Hausa community, then you see the real meaning of tolerance in northern Nigeria. The whole thing that you are not supposed to be talking, you're supposed to be killed. You left the religion, you are a heathen, you are infidel, you are, the whole thing will come back. So I have not really started that. I'm still buying my time, I'm still strategizing, and I'm also trying as much as I can to be back on my feet. That's why most of these things are still frozen.
Thank you. It was brightening today. It was very elaborate. So I think that you already answered to many of the questions I prepared for you. So I just have one question left. It's more personal, if you'd like. How are you? What are you doing? Do you have some good news, good updates from your
And of
part?
course, yeah, of course. I have been living in Germany since April. The program is supposed to last only 6 months, but I got extensions, and now finally the program is coming to an end. It's a temporary relocation. What it gives you is the opportunity to change location. Firstly, for safety, for people like me, for safety, because you are under a fatwa of killing, but then also for your own good to assess the situation, whether you can go back home or you have other things to do. So what I did is I tried as much as I can to extend my stay, which is in the process now. Hopefully it works and I can extend my stay for a year or two, as well as observing what is happening back home. The killings have spiked, and lawlessness has spiked. And also, it also enables me within this safe space to re-engage back the northern Nigeria, because that's where we started. I could have kept quiet, leaving Islam. I could have decided to leave it to myself and then thrive and live, but I chose to change the system. I chose to try as much as I can to reform it. I tried to do it as a Muslim. It didn't work. I noticed it cannot penetrate anywhere. So I came out as the non-Muslim that I have been over the years. And now it became a confrontation. Now they want you dead. So I try as much as I can to avoid that. I escaped a psychiatric hospital. I escaped prison.
Yeah.
I escaped mob violence several times looking for me. I escaped Boko Haram also. I was on their target list. A decade ago, I was on the ISIS target list as well. So I escaped all these things. Now I have these few years to assess whether I can thrive or live in the region, or maybe from this kind of safe environment, as much as I can, try to re-engage and try to bring back a debate where we can engage in a civil manner while not being dead, and especially the government not siding with them, because it's always about politics in the end. If I'm speaking as an only person or with the humanist community, maybe a few hundred, but then you have 100 million people angry that I should be killed, then definitely the government will go for where the votes are, and just a person or maybe a small community. While northern Nigerian Muslims number about 100 million, and these are the good votes they need. So whoever could deal with me, for example, might have been quiet for half a decade, then they have succeeded in winning their confidence and their votes and their goodwill. So yeah, I'm still re-establishing my base here. I'll remain in Germany, changing city from the city I've been now to another city, just so I could stabilize enough for a few years to see what comes next. Hopefully, I go back home in the end, but I can't really predict for now.
So, if you plan to run for the presidency of Nigeria, we will root for you and we will keep us updated and best of luck.
Thank you, Miro.
So, thank you once again for your honesty, your clarity, and your courage. Your voice helps us understand not only the facts, but the human experience behind them. I'm truly grateful for your time, and please stay safe. And I hope we'll speak again soon with some even better updates from you.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Love.
Thank you, everyone. Nero.
All right.